Our next guest is well known for capturing the hearts of millions of readers with her fiction and fantasy.
In her new book, Empire of Wild, Cherie Dimaline tells a story about a woman who must fight to get her husband back after he abandons his Indigenous community to become a Christian preacher. Please welcome author Cherie Dimaline.
Well, as we just heard there's a woman named Joan. Her husband, Victor, goes missing, and she spends years searching for him. This is clearly a story about love. It's a story about loss, but not just between these two people, but it's also a story about the Indigenous community and colonizers as well. So clearly very political undertones as well. Why did you want to sort of include that in this novel?
I think, you know, as an Indigenous woman, as an Indigenous writer, everything I write is going to have some political undertone to it. But this particular story started, the origin story is basically how you started the show. It was about a story about hot Jesus. That was in the Walrus magazine. So I was captivated. I'm like, who is this handsome devil? It turns out it wasn't the devil, it was Jesus. And it was an article about these well-funded Christian missionaries that were going into First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities and bringing the people into the church, but bringing them off the land to come into the church, which leaves that land very vulnerable for resource development. So it was something I wanted to talk about.
Well, it's no surprise that Indigenous readers are really responding to your work, and it's because you're rooting your stories in traditional Métis culture. And that includes stories you would hear from your grandmother, like the story of a mythical creature called a Rougarou. And you know, you really put this into your work for a reason. Can you expand on why it's so important to you?
Absolutely. So the Rougarou in my community is a very large black dog that haunts the roads, except that he stands like a man, he talks like a man, he plays the fiddle. And his role is to keep women and girls off the road. So I would hear these horror stories when I was younger, right? Like, don't go into the road, don't go into town because the Rougarou's out there and he'll get you. So it tried, you know, keeping us safe. And for the men and boys in my community, it was if you didn't follow through with your responsibilities, if you were disrespectful to women especially, you could become the Rougarou. So he really is a teaching tool. And so it's one of those things that's so important that, you know, that we pass those traditions along. It's especially important for our kids.
I love that. This book is set in a small Métis community in Georgian Bay where you grew up, and it really is an exploration of Indigenous life today in Canada. How much has your community changed?
Yeah, so my original community, we're part of the Red River Métis, which is in Manitoba. That community was moved after the Riel resistance that happened in the 1800s. My family ended up on Drummond Island, then Canada and the US changed the boundaries, and so Drummond Island became part of Michigan, and they didn't want the Indigenous community on it, so they moved us to a different part of the Georgian Bay, near a town called Penetanguishene. And so we learned, which is now Cottage Country, right? It's very close to Toronto, it's beautiful. Penetanguishene is actually an Anishinaabe-Moan word, Ojibwe. It means land of the rolling white sands.
Oh, wow.
So I understand why people want to be there, but for my community, when the cottagers started coming, we were displaced again. So we learned that everything that's important for who we are, our language, who we are as people, we need to carry in a story because you can carry it when you are forced to move.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's talk about your character, Joan, because you write about her as this confident, fearless woman who really enjoys sex and sexual pleasure.
Yes, she does.
Right?
Yeah.
So why was that, what was it like to write about an Indigenous woman in this light? Why was that so important as well?
Yeah, well, you know, I always say this, the Indigenous people, we have such a fast-growing population because we keep having kids, right? We're hopeful, and we're good at love, right? Obviously, we see it through to the end. But I think, you know, there's so much when we talk about Indigenous women, we talk about the trauma, and we talk about, you know, the systemic issues that happen, and those are important. We need to talk about them. We need to take care of our sisters. We need to keep looking for them. But we also need to talk about the ways in which we are whole and beautiful and loved and loving outside of the you know, violence of someone else. We need to talk about the beauty inside that brokenness, because the heaviest weight that we carry as women is the weight of all of that love.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Wow.
It seems, you know, when you're talking about this, I can see a movie out of this novel. What say you to that, Cherie?
I would love it. So I actually did this thing, you guys, where I casually thought, I'm going to text Guillermo del Toro, because I think he would be great to film this.
my gosh.
So in the middle of the night, I text, at Guillermo del Toro, like, I think you should do the story. It's the original monster of this territory. Let's do it. And I sent it, and then the New York Times printed it the next day, that tweet. And I was like, oh my God, are there typos in there? Okay, we'll see.
We'll see. Cherie.
Yeah.
I love that story. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you for joining us.